we have to talk about consciousness. Our life is actually a midpoint between the two deaths. To use the sexual energy in order to achieve enlightenment. The three-dimensional spiral shape encoded in our DNA, in our biology.
Hello everyone and welcome to yet another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. As always, I'm here with you, Olev. I can see my levels are a bit off. I hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to Rondon and to Vaccines Cause Avian Flu. I hope you heal quickly. That looks like a massive tooth, I have to say. Sorry, following up on our chat for those who are tuning into the podcast regardless, but I wish you better. And Revised Sociology, great of you to join us again. I'm glad you managed to catch us this week on time. Is there a way to stream MSP waves on a smart TV? You mean from the smart TV, or you mean so you can watch it on your smart TV? Because I'm pretty sure smart TVs, you can go to the website, the MSP Waves website, and there you can catch the live stream, if that's what you mean. I'm not sure about streaming from, although you can, smart TV is a computer, so you can basically go online and, Chromecast, and then there's different ones for different web browsers. But yeah, you can, I'm pretty sure you can do it. Yeah, that'll be cool. Let me know how it goes. Anyway, for those who are listening, thank you very much once again for joining me here. I have to say, I'm pleased to announce that the podcast is getting more listens on the apps as well, the different listening apps. So thank you very much if you are sharing it with your friends. If you're listening to this later online, I very much appreciate it. And it's wonderful to be here for another episode. Fox Coit. Thank you very much for joining us. Yes, are you watching on online somewhere? But yeah, welcome to join us in the chat. We're going to get started. We've got a big one today, and unlike the well, no. You put it on, and then if you just fall asleep to my calm, soothing voice, then that's absolutely acceptable. This podcast is to be enjoyed in any way you feel appropriate. So it's good. Close your eyes, put on a headphone or a speaker, and just relax. It's been a long day for some of us. But as for me, I'm wide awake and eager to start because I actually had a thought, a realization, I should say, as I was preparing this episode, that I was very pleased with myself because in the sort of introduction to this series, and as we were going over the different subjects, we really managed to cover a large amount, and I felt that we were very prepared. And as Drunvalo keeps dropping these bombshells of what a synthetic Merkaba is, or attaining enlightenment through interdimensional intercourse, but I felt that we managed to steer our way and navigate through these concepts and have some kind of understanding to lead us through until today, at which point I realized that in all of our the episodes up until now, we haven't actually covered one very vital, crucial subject, I should say. And Mariano, thank you for joining. Welcome. Pleasure as always to have you here. Foxcode, you made it excellent. And Crimson Clad, thank you very much for joining. Wow, lots of people today. Excellent. So, the subject that seems to have slipped my mind in preparation was the subject of, shall we say, aliens in general. We've never actually covered the concept of aliens. Now, in Sitchin's series, we did talk about aliens versus gods and the different definitions that we have. But as a general term, and especially before Drunvalo's book, I feel that it's very necessary to sort of have a once-over just to get through it. Yes, so this week we're talking about aliens. We'll see how far we get through it because, we'll just see how long it goes. And if we have time in the end, we might continue with the narrative a little bit. But the main subject for today is going to be what are aliens and what we mean by that. So let's jump right into it. Now, those who have been listening for a while will know, the first question that we have to ask, obviously, is what's the word that we're using? What's the label that we're going to put? And I thought there were three labels that we sort of touched upon that I'd like to differentiate and to sort of see the differences between them and study the concept a little bit through them. And those are UFO, which is probably one of the more famous terms, at least in the early part of the century, from like the 1950s, and extraterrestrial, which was obviously more famously made by the film E.T., and the last word I thought was alien. And each of these terms has a different connotation and actually a different meaning to some extent. So we'll start by going over them and seeing what exactly it is that we mean. So what is a UFO? As I assume most of us know, it stands for Unidentified Flying Object, and it was actually a US military term, the Navy, which I never understood why the Navy was so on top of UFOs as opposed to the Air Force. But nevertheless, most of the sort of sightings and the classified documents and all of the instances, most of them, came from the Navy. And so the Navy came up for this military term. Oh, Lax, pleasure having you here. Thank you for joining us. This term UFO, which means an aircraft, an airborne vehicle of some kind, which is not just unidentifiable, but which actually defies any of the current known technologies that are out there. So not just something that we're not sure if it's a bird or a plane, but actually a vehicle which cannot be placed within the known technology that's available today, and therefore is more advanced. So immediately we have a not a problem, but we'll say a difference in this sort of definition as opposed to, let's say, either a flying saucer or an ET, which is a UFO could be advanced technology from Earth. There's nothing in the definition of a UFO that claims that it has to be from outside of Earth, from space. As long as the flying object is unable to be identified as a certain technology, it seems to be more advanced, it will be classified as a UFO. So, for example, if we think about the stealth bomber, the famous plane, when it was developed, it was a completely secret operation and nobody knew about it, certainly other countries. Now, of course, UFO is an American term, so the stealth bomber was never called a UFO because the Americans used the term UFO. I don't actually know about the first stealth bomber sightings of other countries. And it is obviously much closer to an airplane, and it's much more easily identified as human-made than a flying saucer that disappears. But nevertheless, if the military saw an aircraft like the stealth bomber that had never been seen before, that was using cloaking technology, as in stealth technology, to not be visible on the radar, this could be classified as a UFO. And as an object, a flying object that cannot fit any of the current understandings of the technology. So the UFO is probably the broadest term that we can use, because it could really mean not classified as an extraterrestrial, as something that's outside of Earth, but simply unidentified yet. Which leads us very nicely into our next term, which is extraterrestrial, literally meaning outside of Earth. Anything that is coming in from space, from outside of Earth, is classified as an extraterrestrial. So obviously we know it much more as being these sci-fi beings, what we call aliens. But for example, if we think of the concept more largely and try and bring it a little closer to home, in Sitchin's writings, we actually came across this idea once before. And so obviously, according to Sitchin, the Anunnaki are extraterrestrials because they came from outside of Earth, but according to him, when they created humans, then we are as well, in part, extraterrestrial. Half of our DNA, which came from outside of Earth, is extraterrestrial. And indeed, according to Sitchin's timeline, if you'll remember, going all the way back, the initial impregnation of Earth with the seed of life was done when it crashed into Nibiru all those years ago. And so the seed of life that actually came to Earth seems to have come, according to Sitchin, from out of space. And indeed, this is a known theory in the field of evolutionary biology. There is a theory that claims, and this is usually connected to mushroom spores, since mushroom spores can actually survive in out of space. It's said that it is possible for mushroom spores to leave a certain planet, travel through space, arrive at another distant planet, and once they sort of come into contact, can procreate and can develop. And so that would be an instance of an extraterrestrial species, although not tentacles and walking around, but mushrooms could very well be an extraterrestrial species that arrived on Earth from outer space, from outside. So when we say ET, a UFO is going to be an object, meaning not a living organism. Extraterrestrial means either an organism or an object, but that has simply originated outside of Earth. That's all it means. Okay, and so... Oh, Alien Honey, welcome. Thank you for joining us as well. Great, get focused. And the last term that we're actually going to be talking about is the word alien, which is probably the one that I use more than any of the others. And this term is an interesting one because it's a word that we have in our language. It really means sort of strange, foreign, not local, exotic, etc. And for many, many years, I was completely convinced that the song by Sting was in fact from the Men in Black soundtrack. Because in the words there, I'm an alien, I'm a legal alien in New York. If he's a legal alien in New York, then he had to have gone through MIB. It was years later that I discovered that the word alien can mean anyone who is foreign. And obviously today, when we talk about illegal aliens, we mean mostly people. So alien simply means anything that is foreign, that is alien to us. And that can even mean, in that sense, something much closer. If it's something that I've never seen, even if it's within the same area. So let's say I'm in a certain part of the country and I go to a new part and I see a new flower, that flower would be alien to me. So it's a word that can be used in our language for various things that mean foreign. But obviously, within our context, when we're talking about an alien, we're talking about an extraterrestrial being. So specifically also, I think, not an organism of any kind, but an intelligent being that is an extraterrestrial, that hasn't originated from Earth. Okay? So those are the three terms that we're sort of guiding our way through. And we're going to try and delve in a little deeper to understand what this could actually mean. Because really and truly, the whole world of extraterrestrial UFOs began in around the 1950s, this century. There have been certain sort of sightings and things that have been spoken about in earlier times. But in terms of the concept of a being that has come from out of space using technology, really started to catch on in the 1950s when obviously it became more apparent and more plausible for us to imagine there being such a technology. And so we'll get into that a little bit more later. But it's interesting how quickly and how much this topic really caught on, and not specifically within the scientific community as much, although scientists do enjoy talking about the theories and the probabilities, but there aren't that many serious scientists I know of who are, investigating the matter here on Earth in terms of its relevance. There's obviously scientists who are monitoring outer space and trying to find all of this evidence, etc. But it's certainly less caught on within the scientific community. Where it really did catch was in the science fiction world, which really sprung up from it, and the whole fantasy concept of imagining what it would be like if aliens visited Earth and what they would be like. And that has really, grown, as we can see, until today, and is still going strong. The concept of UFOs in modern culture is very, very predominant. We can see it in many different places. as the GIFs in chat are proving very clearly. So what does this mean for us, where we're talking about? Well, we've actually approached this concept once before, as I'm sure you'll remember, with Sitchin's books, where we were dealing with aliens who supposedly had visited Earth. And we saw this very curious difference in semantics, in terminology, where if in 1950, if people saw beings land from the sky, they would say extraterrestrials, UFOs, they would say beings that are using technology to traverse. In ancient times, before any of this was known, the other word that was used for that was magic. And, belief and miracles and all of these different concepts for the spiritual ability to do things that seem impossible. And this is a very known, famous sort of dilemma, I think, of like how much of antiquity was just clever technology, just like magic tricks that were simply fooling people with smokes and mirrors who were much less aware of the possibilities, and therefore it was a lot easier to do. But nevertheless, if we're considering the story that Sitchin is talking about as being a possibility, then we see that if extraterrestrials had visited humanity in any time in early history, the ability of the people to perceive, to understand what it means that there was another alternate evolution taking place on a different planet far, far away that was ahead of it's a lot of concepts that are simply not thought of. That was an era of anthropocentrism where, people believed Earth was the most important, that it was the reason the solar system was created, the sun revolves around it, everything is there to support the human beings who are the peak of creation. And so the other creations that may be stronger than them are the gods who created people in one way or another. And so this all makes a lot of sense when we reach 1950, when people start over centuries seeing how much was lied about or misconceived when it came to religion, and just how far technology can go, just how far technology can advance humanity. People started believing that really anything was possible. And indeed, there was a lot of talk of both, interstellar travel, traveling to distant stars through space, and curing all of diseases, and doing all of these unbelievable, amazing things, thanks to these new technologies that were coming out. And in a way, although I think we're less naive than they were in the 1950s, we do seem to be suffering from the same delusion today. It would be hard-pressed to find things that people were convinced were impossible to do using technology, considering all the technology that we see today, things like artificial intelligence or nanotechnology or, Neuralink. We really no longer can tell what the limits are for technology. And so that brought in this whole new concept of, if there were other beings who weren't on Earth, who were simply more advanced because they were around for longer, just because we're more advanced the longer we are here, would it be possible for them to have reached Earth, to have come here in some form of spaceship? And so that became a very possible scenario. So that's really where we get the last 50 years of our, alien culture. Sorry. So where does that leave us in terms of our story? Well, we come across a problem, and this is sort of the same problem that we've had in many subjects of this separation, this binary outlook, this either-or perception, where we used to believe that it was magic and gods, and if anything was inexplicable, it had to be metaphysical. And then we sort of woke up from this childish perception and said, no, everything is scientific and understandable. And if you see anything happen, it's either a trick or technology. And now we're stuck in that place. And I feel that we need to move forward to be able to once again combine these two concepts and balance them out a bit more. And so all of the talk, or maybe not all today because things are changing, but let's say in the beginning, in the 1950s, the perception of UFOs was absolutely of the third dimension. although I think that language wasn't really common back then. But it was considered that this was some kind of aircraft with amazing technology and anti-gravity propulsion and, whatever the terminology was, how they understood it to be. It was always within this same third-dimensional physical experience that we have. That actually is changing, and it has been changing over the last few decades, but this is really where I think this comes into what Drunvalo is talking about and why I felt it was necessary. With Sitchin's book as well, his description of the Anunnaki is almost entirely physical, as we've mentioned a few times. It never steers away towards the metaphysical. Any metaphysical actions like the huge fiery air fights in the sky, or destroying mountains, or mining gold, all of these were achieved thanks to technology, albeit a very advanced form of technology, but it was always considered something of the kind that we do now, simply more advanced. Once Drunvalo enters the picture in his narrative, already, if we recall, we can see that there are the Martians who are using a technology very similar to what we imagine we use today. And then there are the Lemurians, and the Lemurians are using a different kind of technology altogether, what he called feminine technology, female technology. And really, the word that I would use was a sort of spiritual technology. And indeed, the series on Drunvalo, if you remember, is called Spirit Science. And this term, spirit science, I think is a very crucial one for us to understand and to explore. Indeed, it's what we've been going into and we're going to go into. And it relates specifically to aliens, UFOs, and alien technology in general. Sorry, I got a real thing with my throat today, I hope. Can you hear everything okay? Are the levels all good? I forgot to mention at the start. If there's any problems, please let me know. Solo, welcome. I didn't see you there. Thank you for joining as well. So, this term spirit science, it obviously marries these two distant ideas, which were always considered mutually exclusive. Either, you have faith and you believe in miracles and metaphysical things, or you're a scientist and you're an empiricist and you only believe in what you can feel and touch. But very few people will claim, to sort of cross over those two and to marry those two ideas together. I shouldn't say that, that's not true. But the majority, I think, of what we hear about is that these two are distinct and you have to choose sides. Oh, good, I'm glad, excellent. That I sound okay. So, when Drunvalo is talking about this, because of our history of where we've seen all of this from and our understanding or lack thereof of UFOs, we've kind of fallen into this narrow understanding, narrow perception of this UFO alien phenomenon. And for most people, like these terms, UFO, ET, alien, they're pointing to an alternate species, meaning we are human, and then there are aliens. And all of the aliens that are out there are classified under one umbrella of, alien life form. But there comes a question of whether that is a too general categorization. And instead, maybe there could be multiple species of aliens. And what would that look like? Oh, Alien Honey has just posted a book, Beyond Lemuria, Oracle Cards. Oh, they're cards. Oh, nice. This is the book that goes with it. Very nice. I've never heard of that. I'll have to check it out. And I can see that Dunstable has joined as well. Welcome. Okay, so sorry about that. When we are thinking about this concept, we realize that, I say we. When I first discovered, I thought, okay, there are aliens, let's say the Anunnaki, and they came here thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and they've been here ever since. Maybe they're still here today. And so the UFOs that we see are the Anunnaki at work, and the stories of abductions are the Anunnaki abducting. And, all of these things basically need to come under this one cloud and fit together. And that didn't make sense. It's not true. You see the behavior of different aliens described in different cultures as being very, very different, understandably. And I think this links into another idea that I hope I'm not going all over the place, but will take a slight detour to come round, and I hope it'll clear everything up in the end. I had a discussion, I might have actually mentioned this before now I come to think of it. I had a discussion with a friend many, many years ago that has really stuck in my mind. And we were talking about spirituality and the path to liberation, and he, in his words, said, this not in his words, but according to Buddhism, I should say, there is our level where we are now, and then there is becoming a Buddha, which means enlightenment, complete unification with the source, liberation. And those are the only two levels that really interest most of the Buddhist texts. Everything is about getting to there from here and nothing else. And when I said to him, as I was actually, very into Drunvalo at the time and the Anunnaki, etc., I said, I agree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. But between this level and that level, there's so much going on that I can accept. It's not the ultimate truth. It's not the source. It's not the end goal. That is obviously that one unified space or idea. But from where we are until there are many, many different levels that we can talk about. If we'll take an example, what Drunvalo calls dimensions, in each of those different dimensions, there are different worlds, there are different beings living there, and we could consider some of the things that we've spoken of, such as angels and demons and aliens and gods, etc., as being different beings living in those different or existing on different dimensions. And the question is, why does that sound so, I think, so foreign to us, in the sense that when I was first discovering about this, it was all very, very new, and it wasn't the accepted sort of perception even of God. The accepted perception in most, I'd say, of my listeners' cultures, probably, is the monotheistic perception, which is there is God, not a God, but the God, the one true, creator of all. And then there are us, and then there are sort of some some angels, but they're his creations. And there may be demons, there may be a Satan, but everything is under this one grand, ultimate, God. And in earlier times, in earlier cultures before monotheism, really, there was a different perception. And we can see this with Sitchin's writings about, the Sumerians' writings of the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki there described themselves as being part of creation and as recognizing that there is a higher power above them. And this really is the whole concept of a pantheism and having multiple gods of sort of varying abilities, ranks, degrees. This whole concept that there isn't simply a God that is the be-all and end-all of everything, or even if there is, on top of that, there are many, many other beings in between, as it were. Not the source, but higher dimensions than human beings. And this is the concept that I really want to use to sort of explain what we mean by different alien species. Not only are we talking about sort of an evolutionary timeline where there are alien elephants and alien giraffes, but actually that within different aliens and different stories that we can hear, I think, we can be talking about different dimensional beings, beings that exist on different dimensions. Okay, so let's think of a few examples, maybe to try and ground us a little bit back to where we can sort of fit this all in our head. The most famous, I think, UFO sightings that we are familiar with are sort of flying saucers, and at least they used to be, I should say. The general discussion, the general story of flying saucers is that they travel at tremendous speeds and are able to change direction instantly. And often they talk about changing direction at a 90-degree angle, which is also the hardest angle to change direction. And for those who have been listening, you'll remember that this is because the 90-degree angle is a very special one, It in fact sort of changes all of the force, all of the momentum in one moment to the most opposite angle, sort of comes head on against it. And this is what's used, according to Drunvalo, for changing dimension, according to the Egyptian paintings that he found. So, side note, interesting, and this is in fact what Drunvalo claims that some of these flying saucers are doing when they are sort of gaining speed and traveling at this fast rate across the sky and then changing into 90-degree angle. Very often they disappear, according to the people who are seeing them. So they travel very, very fast, they change direction suddenly, and then they just aren't there anymore. And this, as crazy as it sounds, actually fits very well with Drunvalo's narrative of attempting to change dimension. And when an object changes dimension, as long as you are perceiving only this dimension, you'll simply see it disappear. If you were seeing that other dimension, you would simply see it appear. And if you had the ability to see through dimensions, then you wouldn't see technically anything happen at all, unless you could see the difference. But that is also another perception that we can imagine and think about, but we won't go into it right now. What we will talk about is what these different beings could be. So if we consider the UFO, the spaceship, the spacecraft, whatever it is, as being not of our technology the way that we know, according to Drunvalo, with a lot of these spacecrafts, they are actually, I should say, organically or biologically tied into the person flying it. And this might trigger a certain recall for some of you to thoughts of the Merkaba that we were talking about. Excuse me, I'm so sorry, I have something in my throat. When we spoke of the Merkaba, we said that the way that the Merkaba functions is that it is actually generated from our aura, from our body's energy, and it's tied into our consciousness through that. The same, Drunvalo says, is true of the pyramids in Egypt. When they are being utilized by a being as they were intended, they are actually connecting to the consciousness. And indeed, this concept has even grown into the different films from our culture, etc. In a way, what's the film? Oh my gosh, I've forgotten it. Avatar is that sort of thing. It's having the vehicle tied into the person's consciousness and being controlled not physically, by burning fuel, but actually mentally, emotionally, etc., etc. So with this very advanced technology, what Drunvalo suggests is that it's a form of spirit science, which seems to be a good categorization, a science that is not external to the being, but is part of the spirit, part of our consciousness, tied into that. And indeed, the technology that they used on Lemuria and part of the technology on Atlantis seems to fall into this category as well. So where does that leave us? In terms of the possibilities, and I hope we'll have a little time to go over some of the species, although I have to say I am not a ufologist. I'm not an expert, not on alien species or aircrafts. There are people who really study these things and very much like I was going to say zoology. There's a word, cryptozoology. I can't remember, the study of made-up animals. But there is a huge number of people who really study the different sightings and trying to categorize the different species and really gather data. I am not that by any stretch of the imagination. I mainly hear about aliens and the species of people's writings, generally of things that are happening. And so that's why my information is very partial. There is so much information out there. I should really mention right now, if at all you're tickled or interested by any of this, then please have a look, do some research. There's really fascinating stuff out there, especially today. But for us and our intents and purposes, the whole reason I'm going into this whole episode right now is because of what Drunvalo talks about next. And what he mentions, I will call it in a certain way, he sort of talks about a council of aliens. And this is an idea that, again, has been probably very famous. I mean, even if we consider the pantheon is a sort of council of gods, of many, many gods, that some are chosen in order to, decide the fates and decide when to intervene and when not to, etc., etc. So obviously this concept has been around for a very, very long time. But if we're trying to relate it back to our reality and trying to see how this can all fit together, it'd be worth talking a bit, I think, about the idea of an alien species that is more advanced than what we consider. So if we'll go to the book just for a moment, what Drunvalo mentions is that when the synthetic Merkaba goes wrong, when the cataclysmic event happens, the Lemurians, the Nacals, if you'll remember, do their best to try and salvage the situation, to try and heal the problems and to try and help the people. But unfortunately, according to Drunvalo, they are ill-equipped to do so. And this is because they're relatively young. They're only a few thousands of years old in terms of their experience as being immortals, and they simply don't know enough to be able to deal with such a huge crisis. And so, their infinite wisdom, and as happens in many, I think, different stories in different cultures, they decide to pray to higher beings. And this is, I think, always, as I mentioned before, a curious thing to come across. We come across it with Sitchin's writings as well, and in various places where a god, an alien, a metaphysical, extremely powerful, so much more advanced than us being is faced with their own limitations and seeks help from a higher being. And in this case, that seems to be what happens according to Drunvalo. And indeed, they reach upon this, higher council of beings. And so we're not going to go any further into the narrative because we're going to save that for next week. But we'll talk a little bit about what this could mean in terms of how we understand it. So when we're thinking about the Nacals, it's obvious that in the story we see that there are two sides, one sort of versus the other. Even though they're spiritual beings and all they want is, enlightenment and love for everyone, they disagree with the martial way of living in general, or at least they disagree with the exclusivity of it, the fact that it can only be one way. And so they are opposed to the Martians, however we want to look at it, in the same way that many spiritual beings have been opposed to others. And this opposition is a lower level of being, a lower dimensional perception. And what I mean by that, and obviously I'm not excluding myself, we are all of this level where we see ourselves and the other. And that is simply the way we perceive, because we have a unique perspective and point of view. We always perceive one as who we are and where we're looking from, and then there is the other. But these spiritual beings who are in this council, who are sort of overlooking all of the proceedings, don't, I'll say, suffer or don't enjoy that perspective. Their perspective is an inclusive one, an absolute one. And to understand what this would look like, it might help to use an analogy that actually comes from Alan Watts, whom I haven't mentioned for a very long time. But he said, when we're looking at this, that it's very easy to see sort of war and strife. And I think even especially today, with everything that's going on, we are constantly choosing sides and indeed choosing which side not to be on. But if we look at the human body, our own body, it is obvious to us that it's one organism, that it's one unified being that is working together towards the goal of doing what I want. But if we look with a microscope at the smallest parts inside, we see there's a whole universe of beings that are sort of coexisting and living together. And if we looked very closely, we'd see that it's actually in a state of war. And has been ever since we are born. Our body is in homeostasis, which means that it's always self-equalizing, but it reaches that homeostasis by always correcting and then correcting again to the other way. And this is the same with, our immune system that is constantly battling invaders, and with the bacteria that are living all over us in different places. Our whole body is a huge, on one level of perception, a huge mess of just absolute chaos and fight for survival. It's like a jungle in there. And yet, when we actually perceive our body, we see it only as a unified being that's completely working together. And if any one of those sides won, everything would be lost. And I think that's a very good example, for me at least, to understand how these beings conceive it. Because if we look at planet Earth as being, one of, and an example, then it might give us that shift in perspective. Because right now, it's me or them. It's a fight for survival. It's anyone who is threatening my life is threatening everything. And there is nothing beyond my life that's more important, or my family, or etc. It's my things, my existence. Even if I'm willing to give my life, it's to give my life for something else of mine, as it were. But if we were looking at it from the outside, we could see it as a sort of, an organism, a body. And seeing that if one species dies, if one side is victorious and eliminates the other side, then that's a loss. There is no one side that needs to win. All the sides need to be harmoniously working together. And that harmony doesn't look like everyone holding hands and getting along, but it actually looks like that interaction. We see it in nature where it's not peaceful and loving, it's horrendous and very, very violent, but that's how the homeostasis is maintained. And when we look at a lion hunting, a deer, we don't see it as an act of vengeance. We don't see it as the lions preying on the deer in the sense that they're sort of ganging up on them or trying to choose sides or saying that lions are better. But in fact, if they ate all of the deer, then the lions would die out as well. And as they ate more deer, there would be less food available and fewer lions could eat, and therefore they wouldn't die. They would die out more so. So there's this level of homeostasis that isn't just achieved through peaceful means and through non-violence, but nevertheless, it's always a state of homeostasis, a striving of everyone to be able to exist as one unit, right? Planet Earth as one. And so I'm not preaching here to behave as animals by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a pacifist, and I believe that humans, unlike animals, are capable of living in much more peace and agreement, because we're not fighting to survive in the same way. We don't have to, I should say. But nevertheless, if we try to see that perception, we could see an alien species that was so much more evolved, not just an immortal human, not just a human that's reached liberation, but actually a being that's sort of beyond the cycle of life and death in that sense. To perceive of Earth as an experiment in existence, which is only meant to allow for beings to come into existence and to sort of, experience reality in its own unique way. And to see all of the Earth in that unified perception, I think is something that could only really be open to a being that was so far removed from it that it wouldn't be something that's sort of emotionally attached to my identity and who I am. So that was a little bit over the place. I hope that was more helpful than harmful for your understanding. But all I'm trying to say is that if we try to get out of ourselves to sort of leave the human perspective that's so easy for us to see, we can start seeing that concept of alien, of extraterrestrial, isn't just scary monsters in a spaceship, but can actually lead to very, very spiritual ideas where the being that is considered sort of an alien species might also be part, of a larger system that has higher levels of dimension than what we even conceive or think about right now. And so I hope that's more. You know what? Actually, I'll ask in chat if there are any questions about what we've been talking about so far. Yeah, please let me know now, because I want to take the time to answer them, and we are getting close to the end. Excellent. Oh, I can see Mariano has posted about the elongated heads. Elongateds have proof of the existence of the Nephilim. They were not human. The DNA is different because the skulls were different. You can't see the suture line that is different from humans. Yes, okay. Yeah, we've actually, I think we went over in one of the episodes, but the elongated skulls, as well as a lot of evidence, is just very, very interesting. If you haven't heard of it, then really do check it out. But again, isn't it interesting that most of what I've read about elongated skulls and about the different findings and the different proof of aliens is always that it comes down to sort of an alien being, an alien species, and it's not formed yet into a context of in relation to other species. So, for example, those who are studying the elongated skulls don't usually talk about UFOs, or don't actually study UFOs. Even though, in a way, those two seem to be both alien. And I think we could actually benefit from trying to expand the way that we perceive these things from, let's say, elongated skulls, giants that were here, UFOs, alien abductions. Each of these different categories can shed some light on this very, very general perception of, let's say, a non-human being. And it might be interesting. You know what? I'll actually mention one more thing that I think it must be getting very late in the podcast, because I keep feeling I'm repeating myself. But I'll also imagine that some of you listening to this may be listening for the first time. This may be the first episode you've chosen. And so for your benefit as well, I will reiterate, I think, something that I've mentioned before, but not before welcoming Simone DE to the chat. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you're here for the next show, then welcome nonetheless. There is a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and it's written by Rick Strassman, and in it he talks about, DMT, which is a very powerful psychedelic molecule, I should say, because it's not actually a drug or it's not a plant, it's actually derived from. Indeed, it's the active component in ayahuasca, as well as many other plant-based psychotropic mixtures that people take. But the curious thing about the book, it's very interesting. If you are interested in the subject, then I highly recommend it. The curious thing about the book is that the first, it's actually not the first chapter, is it? It's the second one, I think. The first one is a bit of an introduction, but the second chapter, if I'm not mistaken, talks about alien abductions. And as I was very, very interested in psychedelics, and I'd read many books, and I'd had my experiences, etc., I was rather surprised. I didn't quite understand why this doctor, had suddenly decided to start the book, not even lead into it, but to start the book with this concept of alien abductions, and specifically alien abductions, not UFO sightings, not anything that has to do with aliens in any other way except for stories of people about UFO abductions. And the reason he said that DMT talk, and the reason he said that he brought this here was because the people's descriptions of these alien abductions were very, very similar to people's descriptions of DMT experiences and taking DMT. And this is interesting because if you know anything about the general alien abductions and the people who it happens to, I'd love to. Here, can I lay your money? Oh, it's very, very rare. I think maybe today not so much, but it used to be very rare to find someone who was both had been abducted by an alien and taken DMT. So we don't have many people to compare these two very, very unique experiences. And so the next best thing was what Rick did, which was to actually copy and transcribe, I should say, the descriptions of people of the alien abductions. And indeed, if you read through it, it's very, very interesting because there are a lot of similarities in the language. And once again, most of the people taking DMT, especially on that experiment, were very far removed. And from, most of the people who have claimed to have been abducted by aliens usually live in rather rural areas in America, North America. I hate to do that generalization, but ultimately, statistically speaking, that seems to be the case. What's his name? Bill Hicks very famously noted. And so, why is it that these two completely different sort of cultures, people with very different archetypal imagery, upbringing, religious beliefs, all of these things across the board seem to have such similar descriptions of these experiences? Obviously, one of them being aliens abducted me, and the other one being, I was flying through space. So there's clearly differences. But when you get to the actual description of what you saw and what you experienced and what it was like there seem to be very clear similarities. And one thought that has crossed my mind since about this, which is why I bring it today, is that indeed, if we imagine for a moment, it could very well be that DMT is a type of spirit science, meaning we might have the ability, according to a lot of people who have experienced DMT, to ingest a biological molecule which interacts with our brain in such a way that instead of moving our physical body, which obviously is much, much harder because it is forced to undergo all of the physical constraints, instead can take our ethereal body, our consciousness, whatever you want to call it, and travel with that to an alternate dimension. And the one thing that, well, I shouldn't say, but many people agree on, there seems to be agreement, is that DMT, unlike many other quote-unquote drugs, you don't feel like you're under the influence. You don't actually feel like you're on a drug. You feel like you're somewhere alien, like you're completely awake, your usual consciousness. You remember everything that happened, but you're now in some point in space with these beings around you that you don't understand. And so, okay, wow, I've got 8 minutes left, so I think I'm going to try and sum that up right now. But yeah, in terms of where that leaves us is just a curious side note for those who are interested in the subject. It could very well be that these alien species, races, who exist on much, much higher dimensions than we are, and then even higher beings than us are actually sort of in contact, as it were, aware of the things that are happening here. And if we are so bold as to consider this an option, then according to Drunvalo, these beings are actually looking after what is happening on Earth. Not in the sense that they will come and stop a nuclear missile and disarm it before people can launch it, although if you get that reference, then well done. But indeed, in seeing the evolutionary spiritual advancement of the human race from where we were indeed, and through where we are today. Just a thought. So, okay, we didn't actually get very far, but I think we'll, we'll give it a wrap up from there. Oh my gosh, and I can see lots of people are here in chat now, so thank you very much for joining. Those of you who are here for post-up, I understand that we have an episode, the show is on next, right? So stay on tuned for that. Tripod, I think if I remember, you're for the post-up. And if you're here for me, thank you very much for joining. And if not, welcome as usual, of course. Let's see. Oh, I can see. Hang on. Is there anything in chat that I might have missed? Again, if you have any questions. Oh, thank you all for the subscriptions. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything I went over or I don't know, please let me know in chat before we go. You know what? Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes. Do you think we can cover some alien species in 5 minutes? I think with the little amount that I know, that's probably doable, right? Oh, Soundwaves Photon, I love you too. Thank you so, so much for your kind words. I just have to say before we get into it, but it's an absolute pleasure being here and talking to you. And I don't forget, I mean, you know, I never imagined that I would be talking about alien species on air live, and the people would actually be there, to be honest. So it's a wonderful time that we're living in, just the fact that I can talk about these subjects and that it's not automatically assumed that I'm completely insane and out of my mind, although I can never rule it out completely. But I do want to say that I really, really appreciate each and every one of you listening here and those who are listening elsewhere as well, of course. Solo says, I think the Greys... Oh, excellent. The Greys are the... So we've... Yes, we're very pro-alien here. I'm so glad. I've been waiting. To find. Okay. You fell asleep during that new show, Alien Worlds, on Netflix today. Oh, I haven't heard... Is it any good? Alien Worlds. I don't think I've heard of that. I'm literally an alien. It's interesting. There's a lot of people today who self-identify as aliens, and I think I not for a minute to diminish the importance or the validity of what they're saying. It's just, I think, a very interesting phenomenon in psychology that I don't think was that common before. But I see lots and lots of people today who are self-identifying as different species of aliens. It's interesting. I mean, well, yeah, I go after Sitchin, so I think we're all aliens, really. I mean, if you're alive, and I've been told that I'm an Atlantean soul who's reincarnated now, so there's that as well. I mean, honestly, if you believe in reincarnation, then what does that mean? You know, we've all been multiple different beings, and just to attach ourselves to one would be, pretty silly in my mind. So if you identify as an alien, I'm completely supporting of that. And if you identify as a human, then that's fine as well. We accept everyone in this podcast as long as you accept everyone as well. I think Alien Honey says, I think it's a good metaphor for people who feel disconnected from other people. Absolutely. Yeah, there were always communities, there were always groups, there were always people want to belong to a group that accepts them and validates them. That's one of the more basic ones, and in today's disconnected world, definitely more people are looking for more options to be able to be part of a group. But it's an interesting choice. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was told, and it's very easy to joke about these things, but I'm really honest. When a friend of mine, when a person told me that he saw that I was this, Atlantean soul that was reincarnated, it makes you feel special. It makes you feel good. It made me feel, I didn't believe it because that was a long time ago, and I still wouldn't say that I feel in any way that that's true. I don't want to in any way imply, but I can definitely see the attraction to that idea, for sure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think, this is definitely the time for us to reinvent our identity, and whether it's gender-based, species-based, organism-based, whatever it may be, as long as people feel comfortable in their skin and people feel that they are accepted, then that is, I think, the most important thing. So... Oh, sorry, I'm reading through chat. I missed a few things here. Definitely. Okay. Microaggression. Okay, guys, if you're listening, join on chat. It's a whole other show that goes on at the same time. You're really missing out. So it'd be great to have you here. But nevertheless, I have to go. Thank you ever so much once again for tuning in. It's a pleasure as always. And I hope to see you all, or for you to hear me all, next week with a new show. Until then, have a good one. Bye.